Hello everyone, welcome to your first Java for Android tutorial. And in this tutorial we are going to talk about variables. To explain variables, consider them as storage units for values. For example, if you want to use any kind of values in Java programming, you need to use variables to store them, and you can use them to manipulate values however you want. There are two major types of variables, otherwise called as data types. They are primitive and abstract. I'm not going to go into the details of these data types because this is out of our scope. I'm going to focus on the four main data types such as int, float, string, and Boolean, which is mostly used in Android and throughout the duration of this course. So let's start coding. I'm going to use the same hello world program that we used in the previous tutorial. Let's delete this line as we no longer need it. I need to store a number. How do I do that? Let's create a variable called myInteger. Okay, this statement is called as a declaration statement, and by which we declare that the variable myInteger is of int data type, and int stands for integer and it can store negative and positive numbers. Now let's assign a value to the variable that we just created. I'm going to give it a value of 5. So this statement is called as an assignment statement, and the equal to sign is called as the assignment operator. The value of 5, which is on the right side of the equal to sign, gets assigned to the variable that's on the left side. We can combine these two statements into one by doing this. So here we declare that myInteger is of int data type and we assign it a value of 5. Let's print this out. So when I save and run the program, you can see 5 is printed, which is the value of myInteger that we just created. Now what if I want to create a decimal value? Integer does not take in decimal values, so we need to create a different data type called as float. And I'm going to call the variable myFloat, and I'm going to give it a value of 1.5. Notice that this throws an error. This is because this is not a float value. We need to add an f at the end of the value that denotes that this is a float value. And similarly, we're going to save or print the value that we just created. And as you could see, 1.5 is printed. Now what if I want to store some text? We have a data type for that as well, and that's called string. Let's create a string, and I'm going to give it some text which says, I love chicken biryani. Okay, now if we print this, the text that we just created gets printed. Okay, now there's another data type that we will be using a lot, and that's called the Boolean data type. And this takes in only two values, either true or false. Let's print this value. As you can see, true is printed, and then if I give it a value of false, false will also get printed. Okay, these are the basic 4 data types that we will be using a lot in the Android development course. Now let's see some examples of operations on variables. I'm going to delete this as we no longer require them. I'm going to create a variable called a of int data type, and I'm assigning a value of 50. Let's create another variable called b, and let's assign it a value of 10. Now I want to add these two values. I want to add 50 plus 10 and return 60. So to do that, we create another variable and add the first two variables that we created. Now if we print, we could see that 60 is printed, which is the value of c, and the value of c is the addition of a and b together. The value on the right gets assigned to the variable on the left. Now similarly for subtraction, a minus b is 40 and that gets printed. So 50 minus 10 is 40 and that's printed. For multiplication, we use the asterisk symbol, and 50 times 10 is 500, and that's printed. And for division, we use the forward slash, and 50 divided by 10 is 5, and that's printed. Notice that division is a bit different. The forward slash returns only the quotient and not the remainder. So if I give it 55, it won't print 5.5. As it's an int data type, it returns just the quotient. And if we want the remainder, there's another symbol that we can use. It's called the modulus operator. And 55 divided by 10, the quotient is 5 and the remainder is 5. So now 5 is printed. So this is the remainder. So if I change it to 6, so let's see, yeah, 6 is printed. So the remainder gets printed. So these are the basic operations on integers. Now let's see some basic operations on strings. I'm going to create a string called A. I'm going to give it a value, let's say I love. I'm going to create another string called B and give it a value chicken biryani. Okay, let's create another string, and I want to combine these two strings together. How do I do that? So the same way as did with our integers, we just add them together. So if we print C, we see that I love chicken biryani is printed. Notice that there's no space in between. There won't be any space. If we want space, we can just add it at the end of this word, and now there's a space character that's created. And this process is called string concatenation, by which we use a plus sign in between two strings to add them together. And this not only applies to strings, but for integers as well. And we can add strings to integers. So I'm going to call this number and assign it a value 10, let's say, for example. And we can add them to string like this. So now C will print I love chicken biryani and the 10 follows. If we want a space between, we can do that as well, and that gets printed. Notice that this is not an integer data type anymore. So this integer data type gets converted to a string when we add them together, and that's printed. So it's a string overall. It's not an integer anymore. That's it for this tutorial. I will see you guys in the next tutorial. This is Alex Vijayaraj. Have a good one.